Christmas. To many, the most wonderful time of the year. Things are merry, warm, and bright. Well, usually. Sometimes, however, Christmas is the perfect time for an eerie encounter. Here are 5 such stories. I was 5 years old and I was in my room when I heard shuffling in the living room. I got up and peered around the doorway where I saw a man in a Santa suit standing in front of the Christmas tree. He must have felt my presence because he turned around and looked at me. But he didn't look jolly or kind or happy like you would expect Santa Claus to look. In fact, he looked kind of eerie, like he was staring into my soul. Automatically, I ran into my parents' room and hid under the covers. I don't know why I was so scared at the time, but I wrote it off as a dream for a while before I forgot about it completely. Years later, I remembered it. I thought perhaps it could have been a burglar, but when I asked my parents about it, nothing was ever missing from the apartment. So that leaves me to wonder, was it just some weirdo that broke in to snoop around? Or was it some kind of apparition? My mother, to whom I was very close, passed away in 1964 when I was 17 years old. I left home that year and moved to Ontario from Nova Scotia. In 1969, I met a girl whom I'll call Karen, and we got married in March of 1970. In December of 1971, we were expecting our first child. We were living in a small 1.5-bedroom bungalow. There was a fireplace in the living room. My wife and I loved the fireplace, and we had it lit every night. It was Christmas Eve 1971, and we had just finished putting the gifts under the tree, and a nice fire gave off a beautiful glow. On the tree, one string of lights, which was supposed to flash, had stopped several days before. It was 5 minutes to midnight when the fireplace suddenly just went out, and that string of lights started to flash, while the others stopped entirely. My wife and I were sitting on the floor, and it had become very chilly in the room. I looked over to my lazy boy chair, and a figure was sitting there. My mother, with a big, beautiful smile on her face. My wife, who had never met my mother, said she could see the same thing. This ghost never spoke, but just kept looking at me and my wife and smiling. At 12 midnight, the fire in the fireplace suddenly started up again, and the lights on the tree stopped flashing, and the others resumed. I looked over to the chair, and the ghost was gone. No matter what I did to those Christmas lights, they never flashed again. My parents and I live in a small home that was around 90 years old. It was in a small town called Bluffton in northeast Indiana. The year would have been 1996. We lived there from the time I was 7 years old to the time I was 19. From the very day we moved in, I felt that I was not alone. At night, I would lie in bed with the intense feeling that I was being watched. One year around Christmas time, I was having a friend spend the night. The heat had just shut off briefly, and she and I were sitting in the living room watching television when the temperature dropped substantially. As I rose to turn up the heat, the Christmas tree began to shake violently. Ornaments were falling off right and left, and she and I were terrified. We ran upstairs and lay down on my bed. My white cat curled up with us, and my door was open slightly. When I gazed out at the dark hallway, I was horrified to see a tall, white figure run down the hall. I turned to my friend, and she acknowledged that she, too, had seen the exact same thing. She never spent the night ever again. My scariest experience happened when I was working at a bookstore. About 2 months after I was promoted from bookseller to assistant manager, we were hit by the Christmas rush. It was always so overwhelming. By the end of the night, everyone was so wiped out, and getting all the receipts and drawers counted at the end of the night took so much time. On the nights that I was closing, I let the workers go as soon as they were done. There was no reason to make them stick around and be tired while I was finishing up my work. After I let everyone go, I went back into the office to do my work. After a while, I heard the doorbell ring. We had security cameras, but there wasn't one at the door, so I had to go to the front door and see who it was. There was a guy there who was dressed in dark clothes and had his hood up. I asked him how I could help him, of course, watching him through the door. "Hey dude, I left my wallet in your store," he told me. "Can you open the door and let me come in and get it?" I asked him where he thought he left it and that I would look for it for him. He didn't like that idea and told me he wasn't sure. He had been shopping through the entire store and he would have to look for it. I asked him if he had purchased anything and he said he did, which meant he had to have had his wallet on him at some point. I pointed that out to him and he seemed taken aback a bit. I told him we didn't get anything turned in, but I could take his information and get back to him if we found anything. The man then became angry, telling me that he needed his wallet tonight and he couldn't wait for me to look for it. He kept insisting that I let him in so he could look for it. When I told him that there was no way I was letting him in the store that late and while I was alone, he began getting visibly angry. He told me that if I didn't let him in the place right away, he would call the police and tell them that I stole his wallet. He even got his cell phone out of his pocket and acted like he was going to call. At that point, I had had enough. I told the guy the best I could do for him was take his information and call him if anything was found. I then told him that if that wasn't good enough, then there wasn't anything at all that I could do for him. He got really angry and began swearing at me. He grabbed the door and began shaking it, demanding that I open the door. I told him I was going to walk over to the customer service desk and call the police. I wasn't willing to cooperate anymore. As I made my way over there, I noticed the guy had taken off down the street. I had assumed that was the end of him, and I figured I didn't really need to bother the police for this. I went back to my work and tried my best to get it done so I could finally go home and get some rest. It took me about 2 hours to honestly finish all of my work. I hadn't heard the doorbell ring and pretty much figured that I wouldn't be seeing that guy again. However, when I was going to the front of the store, I did look around to see if he was in the parking lot before I went outside. I went out to my car and couldn't wait to get out of the cold. However, I froze when I was maybe within a few feet of my car. There was someone in the back seat. He was hiding, crouched down with his hood over his head, but there was definitely someone in the back seat of my car, and I knew exactly who it had to be. Furthermore, he must have seen me or he wouldn't have ducked down. I did the only thing I could think of. I turned and ran full speed back to the store. I didn't look back around until I had made it to the door. And yeah, he was coming at me. I unlocked the door and shut it behind me. He made it to the door right before I could lock it, so I had to do my best to hold it closed while trying to turn the lock. As I did, the man screamed all sorts of obscenities at me, telling me he was going to kill me. The door was the kind that opened outward, so thinking quickly, I pushed it towards him, knocking him on the ground. Before he could realize what had happened and recover, I was able to get the door closed and locked. I immediately called the police. The guy left after the door was locked, but fortunately, the police picked him up pretty quickly a short ways down the road. This story takes place 4 years ago, and it still haunts me to this day. It was Christmas night and my family were driving home from this fancy restaurant. I, unlike my family, wasn't tired, so the 45-minute drive seemed perpetual. On top of that, my little sister was constantly moaning about how her friend didn't get her anything for Christmas. After about 20 minutes of driving, my dad stopped at a gas station to get some cigarettes, and my sister, brother, and mother all got out to go to the bathroom. I stayed in the car alone as I had already gone before we left. Once they all got out, I decided to play a few games on my phone. I looked at the car clock and saw that 10 minutes had passed, so I immediately wondered what was taking them so long. As soon as I peered out the car window, I saw a man staring at our car. The man startled me as I didn't know how long he had been watching. What made it even more unnerving is that he had a plain blank face. No expression was shown whatsoever. It was hard to make out any features as it was pretty dark, and he wasn't standing in an illuminated part of the station. He was about 5'9" and looked middle-aged. Once he saw me notice him, he started walking toward the car, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. Luckily, my dad came back with the rest of the family just as the man took a couple of steps. My dad apologized and told me he had been in an argument with a cashier. I didn't care, I was just glad my dad was with me. I took another glance at the man outside, and he was still staring, but this time he had an annoyed look on his face. We drove off, and for the rest of the car ride, I couldn't stop thinking about that man. This wouldn't have been too bad if it had just ended there, but it didn't. Later that night, I was watching YouTube while everyone else slept. Luckily for me, a storm was raging over us. I enjoy storms. It makes me cozy as I'm laying in bed. I put my phone down and just enjoyed the ambiance. That didn't last for long as I heard something smash into the window behind me. I lurched forward and nearly fell out of the bed. I thought a bird had just smashed into the window. I parted the blinds, and what I saw next haunted me. I saw a man standing out by my parents' car, looking up at my room. I took a closer look and nearly had a heart attack. It was the same man that I saw at the gas station, only this time, when our eyes met, he grinned. Being the 14-year-old that I was, I did the manly thing and screamed at the top of my lungs. My dad came running down the stairs and entered my room. "Why the hell are you screaming?" he said. I told him about the man and I explained everything that had happened. My dad grabbed a baseball bat and told me to call the police. After 10 minutes, the police turned up outside our house and found the man in our shed. He got arrested, and that was the last I saw of him. The next day, my dad inspected the house, and we found the handle of our back door had been damaged, but not completely broken. This gives me an eerie feeling, as if he actually managed to get in, he could have harmed us or possibly even killed us.